Welcome, everyone. We're going to get ready to get started. Welcome to the Building State Capability Talk Series. Today with us, we have Yamini Aiyar, and she's going to be talking, the title of her session is The Mirror Cracked on Democracy, Welfare Politics in India's General Election. Yamini is currently a senior visiting fellow at the Saxena Center for Contemporary South Asia and Watson Institute at Brown University. She was the president and chief executive of the Center for Policy Research, or CPR, a leading multidisciplinary think tank in New Delhi from 2017 to 2024. Yamini's work sits at the intersection of research and policy practice. During her tenure, she spearheaded the establishment of two important new research initiatives within CPR on state capacity and politics. Prior to becoming president, she set up the Accountability Initiative at CPR, known for its work on governance, social accountability, and expenditure tracking on social policy. Yamini's research interests span the fields of contemporary politics, state capacity, social policy, federalism, and India's political economy. Let's welcome Yamini Aiyar.
Thank you so much, Salimah, for inviting me to be here. It's an absolute privilege to be here, to be with all of you. CPR has a very close relationship with the Kennedy School because so many of our younger fellows have then found their way here and gone on to do bigger and better things with their lives. And for me too, this is a very special place because although I didn't have a chance to study here, I went to the other Cambridge, the real one, but I did a lot of my actual academic training came through the Kennedy School in different ways. There was a mini Kennedy School in New Delhi when I joined the World Bank a very long time ago. The first person I met who became my friend, partner in crime, mentor, colleague, everything for the years we spent together, Salimah at the World Bank. And Lant came and taught us how to be provocative, creative, energetic, and also always remember that even if you miss a deadline, which by the way you will, make sure that you tell your boss you remember the deadline and you're going to miss it. It always helps in ensuring that everyone thinks you're super professional and you still have missed the deadline. So I learned many things, including survival skills in the professional world, thanks to that experience. And so it's, for me, being here is almost like coming back to where it all started for me. When Salimah asked me to speak here, and we were discussing topics, I thought to talk about the Indian elections, which was somewhat unusual for a home that is talking about state capability in a sense. This is not pure political science in that sense. But I wanted to talk about the elections on this platform because, in fact, the questions of state capability and the way India's politics has evolved, especially in the last decade or so, are very, very closely intertwined. And I'm going to spend the bulk of my presentation really talking about the politics of this. And I say this because one of the reasons why the present, our current Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, acquired kind of national legitimacy 12 years ago had a lot to do with a broad disenchantment within the Indian population, amongst Indian voters, and one that found its expression in elite voices about Indian politics, a broad disenchantment with state capacity in terms of its ability to deliver just about anything. Prime Minister Modi, or candidate Modi, rose to national importance against a backdrop of large-scale corruption scandals that had rocked the country back in 2012, 2013, and projected himself as the leader with strongman capability to govern capably. Maximum governance, minimum government was a slogan that attracted several to his capacity for governance in a country that was in desperate need of good governance. And it was one of the most critical arms, along, of course, with the ideological project, that gave him large-scale credibility and legitimacy, and was very much part and parcel of the narrative that unfolded over the decade. In that context, a very important part of what he brought to the table for state capability was this marrying together of strong leadership, quote unquote, and technology to build out a pipeline for welfare service delivery. And in more ways than one of the most visible contributions that he has made over these 10 years under his leadership, or the Indian state's transformation over this last decade, has been around using technology to deliver welfare benefits at the grassroots level, projected as ways of cutting through the layers of an incompetent, ineffective, apathetic state that delivers on the back of patronage rather than delivery to all. And it has been part and parcel of the aura and the allure of the Prime Minister himself and his political party, has been positioning himself as the leader who's been able to clean up the pipelines and deliver effectively. This is state capability at its best. India projects itself across the globe. In fact, the Prime Minister is in New York today. Yesterday, he spoke to various people, to the Indian diaspora, talking about India's digital public infrastructure as one of its greatest exports. The deployment to the world, the deployment of that DPI into state capability, big part of the story. But I do think it's very important, especially for policy students like you, to also understand that with every attempt at using new tools of state capability, there is also a politics. And that politics needs to be engaged with and understood, because it does create large amounts of complexities, both to the discourse on state capability, what it is, what it isn't, how it can be used, and also what it means for the larger project of democracy, of social inclusion, of equity. And these are questions that we often don't ask in policy classrooms, because we're looking very much at thinking through what the technological fixes are. So that's why I thought I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the democratic context in which the Indian elections unfolded, what that meant, and how the discourse on democracy unfolded in India in these over the last few months. But then I want to spend the bulk of my time focusing much more on welfare politics. And a lot of what I'm going to talk to you about is based on a survey that I was a part of, that we conducted in May during the elections. The other lead researcher along with me is my colleague Nilanjan Sirkar, who's a political scientist based out of Ahmedabad University in Delhi. He was also a colleague of mine at the Center for Policy Research. And a group of other researchers came together to undertake this survey. And so I wanted to also share findings from that and get your feedback as we move forward with this work. So let me begin just by giving you this broad overview. I will rush through this, but we can talk about it in the Q&A, because I wanted to spend a little bit more time on the welfare stuff. I don't think it would be news to anybody in this room to say that India went into the general elections that started in April and went through 7 phases till June 4th, and the results were announced under the shadow of what I certainly felt significantly was the emergence of creeping authoritarianism in our polity. And we can argue about why I say this, but let me just lay my cards out straight up front. In March this year, just on the eve of the elections, the BJP its big slogan was, "This time we will cross 400 seats in the lower house," which essentially meant that there was a push towards total dominance of the BJP, ab ki baar 400 par. Back into 2019, the election slogan was, "If Modi is there, anything is possible. Modi hai to mumkin hai." This time the slogan was, "Modi to aayega hi, Modi will come." It was almost seen as accepted that the outcome of the election is known before the election was going to take place. And there were some very important reasons behind that. This was partly on account of the very well-recognized popularity of Prime Minister Modi himself, which was showing up in all the polls. But also, a lot had been done by the BJP and by Prime Minister Modi himself to give the appearance of total domination, some legitimate and a lot not so legitimate, stifling all opposition voices. On the eve of the election, the Congress party, the largest opposition party, announcing that its accounts had been frozen. On the eve of the election, one of the most visible leaders of the opposition alliance, Arvind Kejriwal, being put into jail, stifling every kind of civil society voice, dissenting voices in every way and every form. 95% of the of cases against where the coercive officers of the state, the enforcement directorate, the CBI, the tax authorities, all targeted specifically at opposition politicians. 17,000 FCRA, the Foreign Contribution Regulatory Act licenses of NGOs were being were rejected. My own institution had spent the better part of 2 years dealing with all of this. There was a very clear media, completely all that you could see when you put on the television was a narrative of the government. All that you could see when you opened the newspapers was the narrative of the government. All that you could see when you were driving around Delhi, the city I live, were only pictures of Modi's guarantee. It was the government and it was this one singular leader that you saw everywhere. It felt like all that needed to be done for total hegemonic control had been done. In January, the Prime Minister became the only visible face of the consecration of the Ram Temple, one of the key ideological pivots of the Hindutva movement. And all over parts of the country, north and south, people were being enjoined to participate in this consecration ceremony. And it really, and pull that together into the slogan of "this time we'll cross 400, it was almost as though the promise of the ideological project is about to be achieved, which is why we need total dominance. Then the election happened. The campaign happened. Suddenly, you moved away from the dominance of national media, the dominance of political party leader voices, to be forced to interact with ordinary voters. And at that point, a lot of things started changing. I'm just going to highlight three. One really important one was that we began to see a fairly large diversification in sources of information and media. Now, it will be argued, as it often does, that social media has a very limited reach, etc., but it plays a very important role in building narrative. And I just have two quotes here from ordinary voters that we spoke to in Uttar Pradesh that give you a sense of the extent to which people were looking for alternative sources of information and narrative building to get an understanding of what actually was going on. Dhruv Rathi is a well-known social media influencer who suddenly came up in a big way. Everybody here in this room, all of the Indians probably have seen his short videos talking to us about authoritarianism, talking to us about majoritarianism, talking to us about corruption. The point was just that the numbers were going crazy. I mean, people were looking for this kind of thing. And we find in our survey some very interesting things. 58% of respondents argue that mainstream media only represents the views of Prime Minister Modi and the BJP. I put that in red because I think it's important to know that the voter was beginning to recognize that there are the extent to which the authoritarian project was actually becoming big. Does this change how you choose to vote? I have no idea. I will say that in the bulk of in our survey, more or less voter choices mapped on to the final outcomes of the election, but that was not the purpose of this. This was to understand people's perceptions. But I just want to show you where it is that red lines do get crossed from voters' perceptions. Lots of discussion about electoral voting machines, a big part of the technology story of why India's state capacity is improving. Lots of debate in India about whether EVMs are fair, not fair. I personally absolutely refuse to engage in this conversation because I can't imagine a world in which we have to question the act of voting itself. It's the most fundamental act of what it means to be a citizen in a democracy. But we did ask this question because it was high on the topics of chatter during the elections. And what is interesting in both ways, 62% say that the electoral voting machine process was fair, but a fairly large 22% say it wasn't fair. And there's a strong correlation with those who said it was fair with support for the BJP. And again, just an indication of the extent to which red lines were being crossed. We know from our data from the National Election Survey of CSDS that real economy questions, no matter how much we were being enjoined into believing that India was going to develop into this grand future going forward by 2047, Viksit Bharat, a developed India, was one of the big taglines of the BJP. We were told that India is on a technological superhighway. India is going to take over the world with its digital public infrastructure, third largest economy. But the reality of most people's lives was very much caught in the challenges of unemployment, and with that also a sense of price rise, partly because of increased food inflation. And all of these came together into a sense of there are democratic red lines that are being crossed. There is a real lived experience that isn't mapping on to what we are being told. And what was really unusual about this election is that the opposition was able to pick up on this for a change, which it hadn't in the last 10 years. And use it very effectively. Early in the election campaign, and this is where the complex dynamics of Indian society starts coming into play. Political scientists have often argued historically that Indian society has so many different pulls and pressures of identity, of stratification, caste, religion, etc., that politics at the national level will always be centrist. And one of the big puzzles of these last 10 years is that we moved from centrist politics to very close to Hindu hardline politics. And the explanations for that are still evolving. I don't think we still know in a satisfactory way. But one element of that, particularly in large states like Uttar Pradesh, was the ability of the BJP to effectively, and welfare playing a big role in it to a degree, create a cross-caste coalition, particularly amongst the lower castes and the upper castes towards Hindutva. What really happened suddenly in the course of this election, there's a dominance story, 400 seats for total dominance, led in the early part of the campaign. A few BJP politicians suggested that total dominance was needed in order to amend the constitution. And this ran parallel to the re-emergence of caste as a very important element in the discourse of the election. And a sense that when they say total domination, they also mean total domination to remove reservations from the constitution. Now, there are many complicated reasons why the election outcome looked the way it did. It was as much a national election as it was many, many state elections. Caste is a complex issue. I'm not getting into the details of that. We can talk about it in the Q&A. But what is really important is that particularly in Uttar Pradesh, caste and constitution and democracy all kind of came together to build a narrative around the Indian constitution. And so I have a picture here of all the opposition leaders when they went into parliament after the elections holding up that little red book. That little red book became a really important part and parcel of the electoral narrative. But what's really important is in this election, the combination of the story of the red lines of democracy, the re-emergence, I don't know if re-emergence or the caste emerging once again as a critical element in electoral politics after 10 years, particularly in states like Uttar Pradesh, brought alive the constitution in the arena of mass politics, which was very unusual. And it wasn't just that political party leaders of the opposition, the Samajwadi Party in Uttar Pradesh, Rahul Gandhi, the Congress Party at the national level, were using the constitution to try and mobilize voters. Actually, when I heard, you could hear voters talk about it, and in very, very fundamental terms. And there's many reasons for it. I don't have time to go into its details. And again, we can talk about it. But the relationship between the Constitution, Dr. Ambedkar as the author of the Constitution, what this means for Dalit voters in Uttar Pradesh played a very important role. You can see from the quote I have here of a young voter in Agra in Uttar Pradesh, Ambedkar means everything to us. We don't think it's easy to change the Constitution, but we do believe the BJP wants to. Whether the BJP wanted to or not is an irrelevant thing to elections are about narratives. The narrative was really strong. A very clear sense of the relationship between Constitution, fundamental rights, reservation. Constitution constitution matters because it protects us as another voter. It gives us reservation. It must be protected. It is our fundamental right. This relationship between constitution, rights, democracy, reservations was a very important part of the narrative of the election in Uttar Pradesh in particular, but it also spread, in my view, to many other parts of the country as well, and played a really important role in bringing to bear the relationships between democracy and fundamental rights and the elections. And of course, I must also note that there are fault lines. This was also a very divisive election on the back of religious lines. None other than our Prime Minister himself went on in rallies using words and language that frankly is not appropriate for the leader of a secular country. And when you talk to people, Muslim communities and Hindu communities, this was definitely on people's minds. But the debate on constitution and fundamental rights and equality never really spoke to the question of constitutional fundamental rights and secularism or equality between religions. So you would hear about the constitution in Dalit Hindu bastis, but you wouldn't necessarily hear about them talking about questions of religious divide, Hindu-Muslim relations. Muslims would always speak about bhaichara. Hindus would speak about bhedbhav, two very different things, equality between religions and equality between caste. And so I think that remains, it is regularly being argued that perhaps this is the end of Hindu majoritarianism. I don't think so. I think it has seeped much deeper into parts and parcels of Indian society, and we need a much more robust debate about that. So that's the sort of broad meta-narrative in which these elections unfolded. And I do think that democracy, constitution, and fundamental rights played an important role in how the dialogue on elections and electoral outcomes should play out for the ordinary voter. And this was a very important piece of the story. So I said in March, it felt that creeping authoritarianism was about to give way to total authoritarianism. In my reading, I think the Indian voter really saved and protected Indian democracy. It is argued that the fact that it was 240 and not 307 or 370 or 400, which are the numbers that were floating around, is on account of democracy not backsliding. I would argue it's on account of the fact that voters recognized that democracy was backsliding and needed to be protected. And there's something intuitive about that sense of democratic instinct in Indian society that saved us, at least for the moment. Let me now come to the question of welfare. As I mentioned right up front, and I'm going to try and go through this as fast as possible. The use of technology was a very important use of technology, and direct cash transfers or in-kind transfers has been the hallmark of the welfare politics of the last decade. And this is not something unique to Prime Minister Modi, although he added the gusto with which it was pursued. It was in the making for quite some time, with the building of the technology architecture built out on this disenchantment with the capability of the state to really invest in public systems. It's too corrupt, it's too apathetic, it does not work. Can we find ways to bypass through these layers? And technology offered a very tantalizing alternative. What Prime Minister Modi's government did at a national scale, which over time state governments also picked up, was in building out this pipeline, building a welfare architecture that was suited to this pipeline. So the biggest push on welfare was not investments in public systems and public and merit goods, health and education as two very important examples. Sanitation, yes, but again with sanitation, it was about private goods via cash and direct benefit transfers. So it's basically using public money for private goods. So even in sanitation, the hallmark was subsidies to build toilets, rather than investing, say, in big sewage systems or fecal sludge management, etc. So the whole welfare, the big flagship programs, the biggest public health scheme that was launched in 2018 was an insurance program through the DBT architecture. A card was handed out to beneficiary families for insurance. So every single big scheme linked itself into the direct benefit transfer system, and it was done in true BJP style with its political communications designed in such a way that you knew this was the leader's benefit being given directly to the individual. One of the hallmarks, for example, of you see that picture there, the first big cash sort of DBT scheme was gas cylinders to women. The Prime Minister is right there. There's a lot of publicity, massive publicity that was given, and it is seen as Modi's benefit that is being given to the individual beneficiary. During COVID, the public distribution system for free rice and for free food, essentially free rations, was the biggest scheme that India launched to deal with the economic fallout of COVID. Quite literally on bags of rice was Modi's picture. So the photograph is really important as a device of political communication. But there's another very important element here, that a lot of these schemes were designed to identify categories of beneficiaries that were legible to the state, largely women, who have emerged as a critical constituency. So caste kind of suddenly disappears in some ways from this discourse. It's women and economic levels of economic capability. Of course, the two intersect, but it's not openly said. And other categories, employment, unemployment, age, young women, women with children, women over 45. So new categories of beneficiaries were identified, and technology is sort of used as a basis on which economic attributes of individuals and households are pulled together into data systems. We do not have the capability to actually make any sense of those data systems. That's where the new consultants are beginning to play a very important role. Again, a very important part of how to think about technology and state capability. As new technologies come in and you don't skill the state itself, it opens up space for all these consultants to come in to do the functions of the state. The state has beautiful databases, but between line departments, no one has any idea how to actually read those databases. And while it gives employment to the policy types, it really raises very important questions about the capability and capacity of the state. And for politicians, this is a great thing because you can build a direct link to the voter, and I'll show you in a second why this matters. It serves the act of welfare benefits serves as a repeated reminder of who's giving you the benefit. It is coming from the party leader. It contributes to a politics that is deeply centralized into the individual leadership, that almost builds out a deification of the leader. Nilanjan, my co-author on this work, has a very nice framing of how to think about some aspects of this. It's a politics that is based on, Modi uses this word Vishwas, which translates roughly as trust. It's a politics based on trust of the leader, and you trust the leader because the leader is delivering these benefits quite literally directly into your bank account or directly into your ration, into your home, food on your plate, in the toilet that you see, and it removes the layers of intermediaries. You don't need the local panchayat for delivery. You don't need the local block office for delivery. You don't need the local district office for delivery. There may be chains in the game, but it is monies that go into your account. It is a benefit that reaches you directly at the point at which the POS, the point of service, where you actually go and pick it up. So it creates a very different kind of relationship. You may still see the local government official and the local administrator as critical to your link with the state, but it isn't the local government official who's responsible directly to give you these benefits. And from an electoral point of view, what does it do? It creates a politics of direct attribution. So when we ask voters who is most responsible for delivering benefits to you, 51% say it's the Prime Minister, 19% say it's the Chief Minister. And there's a lot of state variation, which I'll come to in a second because it's really interesting. And you see very strong correlation of support with voting choices for the BJP, where you see people mention the Prime Minister. So 51% of those who said it's the Prime Minister who's responsible for delivering benefits. This is really important because when you didn't have direct benefit transfers, in India's federal structure, Government of India may use a mechanism of financing schemes that it calls its own, which it can go back to the voters for. But the implementation requires close coordination with the state government. So if you compare this data with 2014, the National Election Survey data, you will see people often mentioning the state government. the chief minister for things like the National Rural Employment Guarantee Program, which is a Government of India scheme, because the states played a very important role in the process of delivery. Now the states are actors of the leadership and the top in the process of delivery, but the direct connection is so closely made with the voter that you can see very clear political attribution. It completely changes the nature of the federal dynamic when it comes to delivering schemes. And so in that sense, it also changes the site of contestation of welfare. Who do you expect to deliver for what? And what is the role of the national, state, and local government shifts very substantially in this kind of thing. Some interesting data here, which I'm still trying to make sense of, but I'll present it to you anyway, on how all of this has shaped narratives of corruption. Let me be very clear, we do not have a census in India. We have a household consumption expenditure survey that was only just done. The last census was done in 2011. The household consumption expenditure survey was just done. Only a fact sheet is out. We have a periodic labor force survey data, which is telling us how serious the employment question is in India. We do not have much independent evaluation like we used to in the past. So it's your claims over mine, your observations over mine, and I have a little bit of survey data to tell you what people are perceiving. I can't say anything about what else is going on the ground. And this is a serious problem for a country that was once known for its statistics. Where we are today is something very scary. Anyhow, we asked people what they thought about, do you believe that corruption has come down? 43% said yes, that's not a small number. And there is a strong correlation with voter choice. 61% of those 43 said it were BJP voters. And we did also ask why they thought it was coming down. And the two most common answers were strong monitoring by the Prime Minister and technology. So some combination of that state capability narrative, strong leadership, technology as a way of bypassing to reduce corruption and reach the voter, reach the beneficiary, is an extremely important part and parcel of how welfare programs are being perceived and understood. But it doesn't mean that anything has gone away. We asked voters, do you have to pay a commission for direct benefit transfers? That is corruption effectively. 49% said no, but a very large 32% said yes. This is 16 states, 36,000 households, so it's not a small sample. The contractor, does he still take a cut? 43% said yes. So it's not that corruption has gone away in any in a significant way, but certainly the perceptions of corruption, the nature of corruption has changed and shifted, and I think in some positive ways, which is why overall you see a somewhat more positive response. What about the role of the intermediaries? 44% said that they do see more presence of MPs and MLAs in comparison to the previous 5 years in the delivery of welfare schemes. But when pushed in terms of what their role is, it largely seems to be about reminding us that Modi is giving you these schemes or the chief minister is giving you these schemes. So the nature of their role has shifted, although they still play an important visible presence in the whole thing. Sorry, you had a clarification question or a deeper question? Because we can take the deeper questions later.
No, it's just a clarification question on the last point where did you ask something about like local, like panchayat?
We did. And those numbers are 43%, if I'm not wrong, said that they see more presence of the panchayat, but for data collection. So all the data that goes into the MIS system is collected by the panchayats and the panchayat officers. In Andhra Pradesh, I'll come to that in a moment, we saw something very interesting. Now, when it comes to electoral gaming, while the BJP has been better at it than anybody else, it's not to say that other regional political parties and indeed BJP's own state governments haven't recognized the very, very electorally powerful relationship between welfare politics and electoral gains in this context of direct benefit transfers. And so you have, particularly in the last 5 years, there has been this emergence of what I call competitive welfarism. Regional parties have figured out that this is one important way in which they can also play the same game that the BJP is playing at a national level in the regional politics. And so direct benefit transfers, particularly to women at state government levels, are also playing a very, very important role. One of the questions I get asked a lot after the 2024 result is, so, you say that there was this direct attribution, it played an important role in shaping the legitimacy of Modi, but it didn't work this time clearly because in places like Uttar Pradesh, they didn't do so well. So where do you stand on that? My answer to that is competitive federalism. Chief ministers are smart enough. All political parties in India today, in my reading, tend to operate in exactly this, are prone rather to exactly the same political party leadership centralized form of inner party lack of democracy. That is how they operate. They centralize power into the chief minister's office, they centralize power into the prime minister's office, and they look at ways in which they can electorally play the same game. Direct benefit transfers are a good way to do that. Revenue, you could see data across states will tell you that 9% of revenue expenditure now across the large big states are being deployed for direct benefit transfers. So you get lots of variety across states, which is interesting because you can also see how this plays out in voter data to a degree. Andhra Pradesh, the state of Andhra Pradesh, you can see up here the picture below. That is, he lost the election, Jagan Reddy, who started a massive direct benefit transfer scheme. Some of my colleagues from CPR who are here at the Kennedy School worked with us on some of the work we did on these projects. And the picture above is of the BJP Madhya Pradesh government that launched a scheme called Ladli Behna. It was meant for women, a direct cash transfer of 12,000 rupees. Andhra Pradesh, you see the red line, there was a lot more direct attribution to the chief minister than the blue line, which is the prime minister. BJP doesn't have a strong presence in the state, but Andhra Pradesh also gets a pretty high yellow line of others. It's a two-party competitive state, the TDP, which won the election, and one of the ways in which the direct benefit transfer schemes were implemented in Andhra Pradesh had the creation of a contracted bureaucratic arm at the village level, kind of bypassing the elected local government structure. So voters that were not keen on Jagan or YSR, the party, often said government officials are responsible for delivering. Those government officials were essentially a way to say we recognize that schemes are being given, but we don't want to attribute directly to YSR. And most of those who said others ended up, in terms of their voter choices, gave voter preference to the TDP.
Can you speak to Kerala a little bit?
Kerala is really important because Kerala has very strong local governments. So you see a very high others, and because we had broken it up, the bulk of the others in Kerala goes to local governments. Kerala does not have as robust. There is also the same centralizing element of party politics in Kerala, but its broad welfare schemes are so they've been around for so long, they're so entrenched, and the local governments play such an important role that DBTs are an add-on, but not core to the structure of welfare, of the nature of the welfare architecture as it exists today. And I'll just point to two others. Madhya Pradesh, which has this Ladli Behna, the scheme for women, which was they had a state election in December 2023 in the run-up to the national elections. The BJP won phenomenally. One of the reasons was the scheme was very popular. It had just been launched in the run-up to the elections. What happens when you have a BJP state government and the prime minister from the BJP on the top? At the national government, attribution goes to the prime minister. So you can see, and the same thing happens in Uttar Pradesh as well. Political attribution goes straight to the prime minister. West Bengal is another place which has a strong regional party, opposition party chief minister. Again, she was very popular for her direct benefit transfer cash schemes to women, direct attribution to the BJP. And I have a whole bunch of slides which I'll show you later in the Q&A because I know I've talked too much, but you see a very close correlation between where you're attributing and how you're voting, or how you say you are voting. And I think that those are very important relationships to understand between welfare politics and all of this. So let me close by just saying this. I think one of the challenges to me, I'm a big believer in a robust welfare state, but I do believe that the discourse on state capability, certainly as it has unfolded in India, has taken us to a place where we valorize the possibilities of strong leadership and technology in ways that are legitimizing uses of technology such that we no longer invest in public systems. This is politically super powerful. After all, if you can beat the national party that is dominant at its its own game. I mean, this is only one part of many reasons why people vote, but it's an important part, particularly in state elections. Why will you not try it out? It has become the dominant way in which we are building our welfare architecture. It also feeds into the dynamic of our democracy in that we are building a very, very centralized political parties where the presence of the party leader, the individual party leader, dominates over everything else. One of the important elements of this is that it converts the idea of the citizen as a rights-bearing agent, as a beneficiary, because it obliges the state to look at you as a beneficiary to whom the party leader is delivering these benefits. It served an important role, in my view, in cutting through some of the societal cleavages around caste by creating this beneficiary category. The Hindi word for it is labharti, the recipient, the beneficiary. And it allows political parties to say, we are giving welfare benefits to all. Your caste, your religion doesn't matter. Show me how there's discrimination. And party workers mobilize on the back of this beneficiary category of the labharti, which works sometimes, as it has for the BJP in the past. At other times, there are other parts of the mobilization around identity and caste that comes up and creates new cleavages. But it's an important tool that party politicians have been using more or less effectively. It raises very important questions about local democracy. Where do contestations on welfare go? When your MP, your MLA, your panchayat is an agent of the centralized leadership who is delivering benefits to you. And therefore, it raises questions about who receives benefits, how inclusive those benefits are, but above all, what is your welfare architecture? Is it about handing over cash and in-kind private goods to beneficiaries? Or is it about building a broader imagination of a capability-oriented society in which solidarity and equity are the foundations? And I think these are important questions that we should ask when we debate state capability. Thanks. Sorry, I think I spoke longer than I should have.
We're gonna move into Q&A and we'll take a set of 3 questions. But before we do that, I just want to ask Yamini a question. This is just really fantastic. You talked a lot about politics and the importance of politics. This is a school of government. A lot of people in this room are gonna go back maybe and work in government in a situation like India, where there is this narrative. How does one engage in this space, one? And what are some skills that students here can think about, muscles that they can strengthen before they go out and play this game?
Gosh, that's such a difficult question to which I don't have a good enough answer. I think, look, I'll speak to the challenges or the questions I ask myself often, and they were particularly alive to me in the last couple of years, which was, I think engaging in the policy space requires you to work very closely and in collaboration and to be relevant to governments that you work with. And how do you balance out collaboration and relevance with critical thinking, which is a really hard question, especially in contexts where politics is moving in directions of very, very centralized, semi-authoritarian forms of governance, which are legitimized in the framework of state capability. And it's not, so how do you play the role of being the critic, but also at the same time continue to being relevant and contributing to the actual delivery of systems? There is no good way of doing this. But the one thing that I think we tried to do, not very successfully in CPR, was when you work with government, can you at least ask yourself and therefore your government counterpart, what are the skills and capabilities that you can build within the system so that those stay in the long term? And part of that process of building those skills and capabilities requires degrees of reflection. So for example, when we work with data systems it's very normal for bureaucrats and us too to talk about eligible beneficiaries who need to be verified. We need to remove the duplicate beneficiaries. We need to remove the non-eligible ones. Everyone is reduced to a number. Can you stop for a minute and say, it's a number in your data system, but it's an individual, it's a household, it's a citizen. And how do we think about the words the vocabulary that we are using? Can we ask if there's a different language that we can deploy when we are using engineering terms to refer to people and households? How do we think about, I'm not making any argument against technology per se. Heck, I use it as much as all of us do. And I recognize its benefits, but how do you use technology as an aid rather than an end? And if direct benefit cash transfers is the preferred mode of service delivery, can we effectively think about public dialogue, deliberation, and engagement even around that? So I cut my teeth back in the days of when the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act was passed and implemented with Salimah in early days of that. We were observers, participants, students of the social audit process. There's a lot of good, bad, ugly, complicated aspects about it. But one of the elements that it had, which I think have gone away, which we can bring back, is that through the act of the Gram Sabha, the village dialogue, you brought this debate into the public sphere. Technology is it's an individual act. I have received the money into my bank account or I have not. If I have not received it, I will go to X to lodge my complaint. If that X officer does not take my complaint because I belong to a certain caste or I belong to a certain religion or I am of a particular gender, where is my site of redress if all public spaces of contestation and deliberation and dialogue go away? So can we bring some of this back in to our everyday democratic experiences? However complicated and painful it is to go and lodge your complaint at the block office or the district office, which is how it used to be in days before you dealt with a server, there was a physicality about you as a citizen going to a state office. You may be mistreated, you may have to stand in lines for hours and hours, but it is the obligation of the officer of the state to deal with you under all circumstances, even if he or she doesn't want to. I mean, endless numbers of times when we go to block offices and district offices, you see citizens milling around and the officers are refusing to talk to any of them, using us as the excuse. We want to talk to the Delhi madam instead of talking to doing our real job, which is talking to citizens. But ultimately, we go and you have to face them as you go out to sit into your car. So I think that there's a huge importance to the physicality of governance, which is actually at the heart of building state capability, that we shouldn't let go. And we need to be alive to it. So every time you walk into a government office, if just remembering and trying to bring that piece of it back in to how programs are designed, how information is shared, why did we need transparency on walls of village panchayats, which was at the heart of the right to information? It was because that act empowers people into a dialogue within the village. And I think bringing that back in is really important. I mean, I, for one, am just amazed. One of the positive things about moving here, my children are going to a public school in Providence, is how much communication there is between the school teacher and the principal and us parents. In the private school in Delhi, where my children go to, the school doesn't talk to us. But this is like community engagement in ways that we all imagine that, could be possible. And I know that there are many flaws to all of this, there are many challenges there, but bringing that back into the debate is really important.
Great, thank you very much. Strengthening systems and policy is about people, recognizing that human side. Thank you. We're going to take 3 questions. Please make sure you end with the question mark, and then Yamini will respond to your questions. Yes, please.
Thank you for the wonderful presentation. And I was just looking at the spread of the states that you presented here. I was wondering if Odisha was at any point part of the mix, because the fact that DBT was important and women as vote bank, and also the fact that the same prime minister ruled for 25 years and now there's a flip.
Yeah. Yeah. So there you go. That's why I notice I still need to make better sense of it. We've just been slicing through the data, but it is quite interesting, as you can see, that you do get there's direct correlation between voters who identified the prime minister as the primary person responsible for delivering benefits and voter choices for voting for the BJP, and similarly for the BJD with the chief minister. So to the extent that when there is competition, you do see these delineations in voters' minds, and those who say benefits come from the prime minister also tend to vote for the BJP. Those who say benefits come from the chief minister also tend to vote for the regional party. That line is very clear, but obviously there are lots of other factors that contribute into voter choices, which is why the BJP just had a thin edge, at least in the state assembly. So Odisha, for those of you who don't know, had a state government with a chief minister who'd been around for 25 years, Naveen Patnaik, and Odisha had a simultaneous election, so national and state at the same time. And the BJD lost the election. But it was a very big thing for them to lose after 25 years. He was the longest standing chief minister in India. And the BJP won, and they also won a larger number of seats in the national elections compared to the BJD and compared to previous years, the previous elections. So it was a big upturn. One of the reasons why the BJP is still a single party majority in the national parliament is because it did much better in Odisha than had previously done before.
Thank you.
Great. There was a hand here, and then we'll go there. Yes.
I have two. One is a very quick clarifying question. We see that based on your survey, the attribution in Uttar Pradesh, for instance, is still pretty high, which is surprising to me, honestly, because I feel Yogi Adityanath's political imagery is also pretty strong in Uttar Pradesh. So there is attribution there to the prime minister, but yet we saw a very surprising result. And UP being one of the largest states with a high number of constituencies, really, I think, affected their Abki Baar, Chacho Baar narrative. So if you have any thoughts around that, one. And two, you alluded to this a little bit in your presentation where you were like, so there is this sort of mechanism where technology and state capacity is there, but you have to go through consultants for that. The actual line ministries and departments don't really have the kind of prowess we want them to wrangle to the data on their own. So can you speak to that a little bit? Maybe if there are any, because I mean, as a student, like as a development economist, we see so many. So for instance, Michael Kramer setting up like a RCT sort of arrangement with the government of Odisha, for instance. And we're trying to create that entire data policy life cycle situation there where we build in monitoring and evaluation and things like that. So if you have any thoughts around that, on how we can do that better and maybe how we can play a role in that, I guess. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Like seeing this data and the election result, like what is the how one nation, one election will play out? If we what does the data tell us what will happen if we have one nation, one election?
Thank you so much for coming and sharing this. A reflection question I've been sitting on since the election results is that what are elites getting wrong about the socioeconomic political development of India?
On Zoom?
Thanks. Fantastic questions. Uttar Pradesh. I think one of the biggest factors that contributed to the attribution. So in the double engine states, which is the term that the BJP uses, where BJP is in power in states and at the center, you do see an overwhelming dominance of the prime minister's imagery in the minds of voters, even in Uttar Pradesh and Assam, which are two places where state chief ministers are relatively stronger players within the party. And this is going to be one of the BJP's biggest problems, which is that it has effectively over these last 10 years done what many used to accuse the Congress of doing in its heydays, which is undermining state leadership to the point that everything gets centralized in the national party leadership, which is argued to be one of the reasons why the Congress one of many reasons why the Congress atrophied as it did. But in UP in particular, while Chief Minister Yogi has a very, very, very strong presence, visible presence on welfare, the biggest game changer was a public, to my reading, and I spent some time in Uttar Pradesh during the state elections, just on the aftermath of COVID in 2022, which the BJP won, was the presence of the on welfare, was the presence of the public distribution system. This played a huge role in how it was relatively better delivered. It was delivered literally, I mean, women would tell me, party workers have called us to say 2 bags of rice have come, please come and pick it up, wheat has come, dal has come, etc. So the interfusing of the party cadres on the ground, the fact that this was seen as Modi's ration scheme in a big way, and it's the central role it played in deeply economically distressed households as a consequence of COVID, was very, very important in the 22 election. And I think you still see the hangover of that in how people see welfare and why it comes to the attribution goes largely to the Prime Minister on this one. And in fact, the PDS is fantastic because it tells us what you can achieve when you actually genuinely do build public system. Because the evolution of the PDS, Salimah will remember in the early 2000s when she was in India, there was this constant argument about getting rid of the PDS system and moving directly to cash. This is undermining our nutritional capability. It is causing all the Punjab, Haryana problems with farmers. It is people don't want it, people don't need it, it's too corrupt, it's completely messy. And lots of effort was made by state governments, actually, not in the elite discourse, which is one of the reasons why the elites get it wrong. Elites were debating cash, but state governments recognize that this is still the central backbone in a very, very economically complicated, complex society of social security. So they started investing in basic systems, and the technology in PDS was built into that in a somewhat more ground up way, building on the experience of Chhattisgarh, Odisha, eventually Bihar also made huge success, and then the National Food Security Act. So when it came to COVID, and there were two things that were done, right, back in 2020, enhancement of budget for Narega and using the public distribution system to distribute free grains and rice, and they expanded the total number of beneficiaries. There's still lots of problems with PDS, as we saw, including the presence of the contractor and the intermediary, but it worked better than the past. And in our survey data too, we see we asked a question about, of all the schemes that you receive, which is the one that benefits you the most? And 69.7%, I think at national level, I haven't yet looked at it disaggregated by state, said that PDS is the most critical scheme that they need. And it actually, it's for all its flaws of the past, it works. So now we're not talking about cash anymore. We still have the Punjab Haryana problem, but that's a whole different issue. So I think that's one of the reasons why you see this attribution. Of course, the election dynamic is much more than welfare. And in Uttar Pradesh, as I mentioned, both the story of the BSP, the question of reservation, the complex dynamics of the BJP and unemployment, and became a big issue, was a big issue even in 22, but it came to a head now. All of these different features played a role in ensuring that the BJP was really humble, and no better way to describe it than the loss of the BJP's candidate seat in the home of the Ram temple in Ayodhya. So it was, and I do think that, I mean, what I gathered from the ground, it's not like this is a rejection of Hindutva. It is that it was just not enough. And while everyone had been mesmerized in some ways by the charisma of Modi, it kind of was breaking, and people were like, yes, no one said the Ram temple consecration was bad. It's that, okay, but that was to be expected. Now what? What about our employment? And, those were the things that people were talking about. And frankly, even very obviously, BJP party workers saying that if you put on the media, all you see is Modi, Modi, it had got too much, I think. On the question of the role of consultants, This is a longer and different conversation. I hope we can have it because I think it's really, really crucial. But I do find that the biggest and most overwhelming challenge that the Indian state and our discourse on state capacity confronts is the emergence of the consultant as, it's not just India, it's happening across the world, but you go to state governments and you think that, elites are talking about public, private, privatization, non-privatization. You're a leftist if you don't want privatization of public health systems. You're a rightist if you say, let's do some PPP. God only knows what's happening on the top. But state governments have just they've stopped investing in the state. They're calling in BCG, ENY. All of you will get really good jobs in all of these places. God bless you. You will earn very well. Please use that money well and sensibly. But you're not building state capacity. Let's be very clear. You are contributing to solving a particular problem, but leaving in its wake a huge vacuum of what actually needs to be built, because ultimately you will go away, but the implementation task still rests with the frontline worker. And actually, if you look carefully at what India has achieved, especially in the last 10 to 15 years, we've got overrun with this lure of DPI and technology and JAM and all these nice things. But where we have invested in public systems, they are working really well, and these need to be documented. Health and wellness centers in public health. They are actually one of the most important and impressive achievements. And if you want to be political about it, I would say, if somebody asks me what is the best thing that Modi's welfare has done, it is the setting up of these health and wellness centers. They have an imagination of comprehensive primary health. They are building the conduit between patients and the tertiary system. Where they exist, where they've been invested in, they are working well. Where up in Delhi did a lot to try and fix government schools, good, bad, ugly. A serious attempt was made, and some movement on a very hard question of pedagogy and learning outcomes was some movement was made there in a short span, which is not an easy thing. The ASHA worker, the reason why we were able to do COVID-19 vaccines relatively better than for a completely broken health system, the COVID, because the ASHA worker was. So where we have invested in public systems, it actually does some PDS, another example, it actually does work. And I think we keep forgetting that in this disenchantment with the larger story of the state and the enchantment with the possibilities of technology. And again, we also forget that actually there's a very complex interface between states and citizens. And that's what we need to be investing in. And here, dynamics of caste, gender, everything plays out. And it's at that level where our investments need to be made, where the discourse on state capability needs to move back. So I'd be very happy if we stop talking about consultants and MIS systems for a few years. Then we'll be able to move the needle further. One nation, one election is an appalling idea. It's completely anti-federal. It is anti-democratic. It makes absolutely no sense. It speaks to why we valorize efficiency to a point where we undermine democracy. What is the argument that is being given that legitimizes one single election? It is that our elections take too long. Nobody asked for a 7-phase in the middle of June election. Certainly not voters and those who had to go and sit in those hot rallies, because all the politicians had coolers and fancy helicopters in which they showed up. It was because our Prime Minister and the BJP and the Election Commission collectively thought this might be a good way. I don't know, some complicated calculation was made. I will stop short of saying something silly. But it's you can guess. If efficiency is what you need, have elections over 2 days. Don't have elections over 2 months. Have counting quicker. We have the capability to do it, especially if we have EVM machines. So I don't buy the efficiency argument. How can you be a democracy if you say elections are a problem? They are too expensive because of the nature of our political economy, not because we have simultaneous elections, because we have multiple elections. Reduce the time. Make them more efficient that way, deal with the big black box of election financing, which no country in the world, certainly not this one, has been able to achieve, but you can try if you want. Don't tell me that simultaneous elections is going to solve the problem. What it will do is...
My question was what the data tells.
How does it, so I have looked at the Odisha data from 2019, where you actually saw split ticket voting. So a lot of people argue that without being careful about it or nuanced about it, that a simultaneous election will essentially mean voters will vote for the same party. It's not so simple. Voters are much more astute. They are able to, and as you can see, they make very clear distinctions on credit attribution and who and how they choose to vote. What does happen, though, in these very centralized party structures does is when you have competition between political parties in the same election, your money, your mobilizational capability, and the issues on which you vote for become much more fused, and that's where the large national parties will have an added advantage. That's my sense on this. But as an idea, I think it's absolutely flawed, and I think more electoral competition is a good way in such a large and complex democracy of keeping governments accountable in their different ways. Elites are getting it wrong for many reasons, including that they don't actually interact with a large part of the country, and that includes the BJP elites and the trolls. They spend too much time on Twitter and too little time actually dialoguing and engaging. But I do think, I mean, there's many aspects to this, but I'll go back to where I started, which is the disenchantment with the Indian state and the enchantment with the possibilities of what 1991 offered us. What did it do? Basically, you know, the kind of quip, Gurcharan Das's quip that the Indian state grows at night when the state sleeps. It had a lot of resonance in shifting our imagination about what the state can and cannot do, what we look for from our political parties, what we look from our politics. And I think one interesting way of understanding this is in the discourse that we're having right now about the question of caste and caste census, and where that plays. It's you know, it's sort of seen as the messy realities of politics, in which identities compete with each other, in which democracy has been the only site where voices can find ways of prising open and accessing state power. That messy reality is always seen as something that undermines our efficiency. And I think that is what lurches the elite discourse in directions that tend to veer much more towards centralization of power, and seek a certain kind of delivery and an assumption that then the good spirit of the market will be able to do everything. And without looking at our own professions, I think, and I'll end here, like the one really significant lesson that India needs to learn over these last 10 years and ask itself why this happened. Why have our collective professions so easily fallen prey to demands of state power? Why did media fall prey so easily? Why did academia fall prey so easily? Why did civil society fall prey so easily? Why did our courts fall prey so easily? What is it about our professions that seek state power and fall prey to state power? I can actually see it much more clearly in state capital relations. It's much clearer to me. But what about everything else? Why did journalism end like this, the way that it did? Why did academia end up the way that it has? These are really important questions that we need to ask. No democracy is robust if its association life isn't. And if our professions fall so quickly, what happens going forward is a big question.
Great. With that, we are at time, so we'll still be in the room if you have questions, but we're going to end this session. I'd like to thank Yamini Aiyar.